Yeah, those are really three significant words. What was planned versus two words that I heard you both share were faith and trust. I think the one thing that's really important and critical is how they both had to walk in their faith, and they had to trust, the God that they believed in. And here they both were visited independently, individually, in order to come together and do this thing collectively. What are some thoughts you have about that regarding your experiences and some of the things that you share with people when you counsel them, a young man, young woman, or even an older man, older woman, for that matter, regarding faith and trust?
Yeah, Karen and I have been, like you've alluded to, involved in some form of marriage ministry probably past 10 years, maybe even more than that.
10 years.
10 years just here. Yeah, good point. I didn't think about that. So even some years beyond that. And one of the things that, at least I always try to stress when I'm working with couples is a couple of things when you talk about faith and trust. One of the things is that I always say, look, when we stood at the altar and kind of committed our vows, I always use Karen and I as an example. I didn't really promise Karen anything. I promised God what I was going to do as it pertained to Karen, right? And oftentimes I think, that whole notion of trust has been betrayed and those kinds of things. And I'm not minimizing that at all. There are serious issues that can come up in a marriage, right? That need to be dealt with. But one thing I try to always remind the husband, as it relates to the wife, and the wife as it relates to the husband, is that your commitment does not ebb and flow on how they perform, because you made your commitment to God. So this notion of having lost maybe confidence in your wife or in your spouse, or them having disappointed you or not having met your expectations. Not to say there aren't things that need to be worked through, but those, don't always rise to the level of, well, now the deal is off, because my deal, so to speak, my commitment, the covenant that I entered into really pertained to God, and God hasn't changed, right? He's remaining faithful. He's remaining trustworthy through it all, so that even when things don't look like, kind of get back to the text a little bit, how we want them to look, they're not going quite how I thought they should go. My trust is not in Karen. My trust is in God, right? And then my faith is that, hey, if I'm doing what you've called me to do to the best of my ability, not perfectly but consistently, then you will work it. You'll work it out. And I think the beautiful thing here, and I don't want to suck up all the air, I'll let Karen get a word in edgewise, but I think the other thing that's beautiful about this is that, and that husbands and wives can take away from this, is trust that God is having the right conversation with your spouse for whatever the situation is, right? There's not this moment where when Gabriel comes to Joseph, Joseph is like, did you find out from Mary what she's been doing? This, that, no, right? It's just about him and God at that moment. And then you're trusting, God, if you're working with me directly, then I'm trusting that you're working with her directly, so that we can be, like you said earlier, all that we need to be in whatever this situation is, whatever we're about to face.
Yeah. I think for us too, when having some of those conversations, one of the things that we focus on is kind of piggybacking on what you had said when we talk about that this marriage isn't a contract, it's a covenant. So if you take that worldly perception into what the marriage is, and you give your 50, I give my 50, then this should be good. That's not what the marriage is set up to be. In essence, the covenant says you give your 100% and I give my 100%. Regardless of how you show up, I'm required based on this covenant to give my 100% to what this is. And I think that's another piece that we talk about when we're looking at, because that's sometimes a lot of that that tension of, hey, you're not doing this, so I'm not going to do that. But you don't get, that's not the line that you get to draw, not with the covenant. Now, and then the other question to that is, what type of marriage do you want to have? Do you want a biblical marriage, or do you just want to be married? Because those are two different criteria on what that looks like and how you operate in that space. So just piggybacking on the issue of the covenant and what that looks like when we're having those discussions.
Yeah, good point, Karen. I really like how you drew out the covenant, who the covenant's with, and you complimented what your husband shared regarding who we're trusting. We're trusting our Creator, and in that trust, then we're engaging now with this other person. And the biblical marriage is an excellent point. We don't differentiate that very much into as much as I think we used to. But I don't know. I don't want to get stuck in that old cliche of saying things ain't what they used to be, because the reality is, I think really, to me, especially given this Western standard of things, we are really coming upon a new opportunity, a new relationship with Christ, our Savior, in recognizing the compassion of the Savior, the acceptance of our Savior, as opposed to the legalism and the penalty or the punishment for a lack of obedience. That's kind of the discipline that many were raised in the 50s and before that, but it also, in that 50s time frame and those years before, we also know that racist practices were pretty predominant, and tons of discrimination, and all that was acceptable along with this other stuff. So I think we're really coming now to a place where, if we allow ourselves to open up, we break beyond this legalism and this requirement to be obedient and expect something in return for the obedience, as opposed to really creating relationship, understanding the covenant relationship we have with our Creator, and the forgiveness that we have in acceptance because of the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. So really like your point about the covenant and the biblical marriage.